this, so so we're going. Okay. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name's James Yarnell. I have my own little company, Baja Consulting is what it is. And I've been doing SharePoint since before it was even called SharePoint, back when it was the digital dashboard, back when it was in Exchange. So I didn't like it back then, by the way, but I still learned it and did it, but I learned that I didn't like it. Just real quick about myself, I'm married, father, and anybody who knows me knows I cruise. That is my favorite thing to do. That is the way I take every moment I can of my time off. I go out and cruise. So just a little fun stuff. I've got my contact information on here. I can make the slides available after the fact too. Some of the demos that we're going to do in here, I've actually got in the comment section for actually plugging in the code and everything like that. So our topic today is the introduction to the SharePoint framework, and you're going to see it as SPFx is the way you're going to see it abbreviated everywhere. So that's a very important thing for synonymous terms when you see that, because a lot of things are going to just be listed as SPFx. And so I stole a little bit off of the Microsoft site here to say the SharePoint framework is a page and web part model that provides full support for client SharePoint development, easy integration with SharePoint data, and support for open source toolings. Okay. What this really is, the SharePoint framework, for anybody who doesn't know this by now, it is the client-side answer to web part development, which is a little bit funny because the original web parts were XML client-side based, everything. So we've gone full circle between client-side, then we went all server-side, then we went, of course, to the app-hosted web parts and all blah, 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 all the different things. Now we're back to client-side, but we're getting such a rich ecosystem. Yep. Let's see what Becky's saying there. So with the different things with the web parts, everything, again, is going to be client-side, and you're going to have some choices on UI and things like that. Any of our normal web tools that we use, you can use for this development. You just end up tying it back around to the SharePoint APIs and the way that they deployment model, which we're going to walk through today. With our SPFx, there's two current options: web parts, which we're going to talk about today, and then extensions that maybe we can do in a more advanced topic in the future and everything. So since we're not going to go over extensions, I just want to throw out what you've got there is you've got things like your application customizer, which allows you to control like maybe the UI of the page or insert JavaScript into every page in a site, things like that. Maybe put a new banner up on the top of a modern page. Something like that. We have the list view customizer, which is going to let you control how your list view looks on a list or a document library. And then we have a field customizer, which anybody who was here 2 months ago, I believe it was, we looked at one way to do some field customizations, more for an end user to be able to do. But the inside of SPFx, it's a much more rich, much more powerful way to control how an individual column or row possibly gets displayed to the end user when they pull up the page. So the important stuff, what you need to know to work with the SharePoint framework. First and foremost, this is web development. That's what it's used for. That's where it goes. It goes on our SharePoint page. Right now, we're going to focus today, of course, on SharePoint Online. This is, to some extent, working in SharePoint 2016 now with a current patch. It is going to become a first-class citizen, is what they said this morning. I heard them say this in 2019. It will be a first-class citizen, and it looks like at some point it'll just be caught up to probably where we are today is what it'll look like in 2019 when that gets released. But, of course, SharePoint Online is the one that just keeps getting all the releases over, and as fast as they can churn them out, they just keep putting them out there. So for your web development skills, you got to know JavaScript, CSS, and TypeScript. I'm pretty sure you could do it without the TypeScript, but I'm actually not even 100% sure of that. I've never tried to write one of the SPFx web parts without TypeScript. But all the stuff we're going to look at today is going to be with TypeScript. And then any other framework that you like is what I'm going to say with that. I said jQuery. It's a great one here, and we'll actually have a quick demo on how to get jQuery into your framework web part here. But pretty much almost any of our development technologies, we've got ways to add them into our web part or into our extension, whatever we're trying to do. And then if you're a web developer, it becomes pretty familiar to you at that point. And then other things you need to know, SharePoint is a very good one. You're here at the SharePoint, the Office 365 SharePoint users group, so you probably have a good idea about SharePoint. And with that, you've got the JavaScript object model. That is no longer recommended, or really hasn't been recommended. They are, I don't know that they're saying they're officially deprecating that yet, but they're not putting as much effort into the JSON anymore. So really where you want to go, as long as so the problem is that JSON still has just a few things out there that the REST API can't do yet, but the REST API is where they're putting all of their focus right now. So everything, all the stuff they're churning out is getting up to on par 100%. It's actually, REST API's got a few things that JSON can't do too. But so there are a few cases. That's why I put the JSON in here, because there are a few edge cases why you might need it. But generally, you're just going to deal with the REST API. And then, of course, where Microsoft is focusing a ton of effort right now is in the MS Graph, the Microsoft Graph framework, which again is REST APIs. But it allows you to not only pull information from SharePoint, but from across the entire ecosystem out there. So it's very important that you at least start looking at this. And I know we had a presentation on that a few months ago that Becky did, and but they just keep churning out more and more. And SharePoint's actually, I think when we had the presentation here, SharePoint was, we had a couple things with lists and libraries that you could pull from. They just keep enhancing it and enhancing it. Eventually, I'm guessing that even the REST API in SharePoint, they're going to say it'll be deprecated. And this is just my guess. This is not gospel. But I'm going to say that they're just going to say everything's in the graph. And that's where they want you to go. So you can combine your Outlook information. You can pull from all your teams. You can pull from Skype. You can pull from OneNote, everything in one set of APIs that you can bring in. And then, of course, the important thing is as you're developing dashboards or whatever it is that you're going to end up developing here, you can pull all of this information from across the entire organization into a single view, potentially, or make them work together very nicely. So we're just going to dive in, and just so everybody knows, I've probably got more information here than we've got time along the way, and if the demo gods and everything are nice to me, we might get through everything, but if we have any hiccups, that we might have some stuff at the end that I'll just kind of list as for future ideas and things like that. But we're gonna dive in, and I guess before we get started, are there any questions or anything like that? Just anything I went too fast over there or anything? Matt?
You're going to share that deck out with people so they can follow instructions on their own.
More than happy to, and that's what I said when you left. And
We're recording.
yeah, this is being recorded, but the slide deck, I do in the, if you get the slide, the slides, it does have the comment. Inside the comments area, I've actually put some of the demo stuff that I'm going to go over and everything, so you can literally copy and paste and redo this yourself. But we're going to stay with a lot of the hello world stuff today. That's what I said in the intro. We're going to focus on the debugging, the setting up of a new web part. But to set up the first thing to do is set up your development environment. And what you've got to do is you need Node.js. Everything's getting pulled from GitHub nowadays. Hopefully everybody knows that. It's all out there. You're pulling this down. You use Node.js. You're going to need your favorite code editor, which we're going to use Visual Studio Code, and of course it's a first-class citizen for this. Actually, Visual Studio is getting better, but Visual Studio Code was actually the only place you could really do any good development for a long time. We're going to use something called Yeoman and Gulp. These are just two different tools that allow us to pull information down from pretty much GitHub and and build our solution that's packaged up. And we're going to walk through the anatomy of our web part and our solution as we go here. So you kind of walk through and you install. So you install Node.js, and again, if you get the slide deck, I've got the link directly to it. You can install Yeoman and Gulp. I've kind of put the command line or the tool here, and these are all command line tools. You're going to find out a lot of what we do today is all command line stuff. we've kind of gone, again, 360, or I guess 180 on that, just turned back around. And you do have to add your path if you want NPM, which is the node package manager, to work. And then we get to actually what we need, which is the SharePoint web part extension generator. And so this page really, I put the link here also. This just gives you, this is just the basic setup stuff. But with that being said, we're not going to stay in these slides for very much today, but I needed to go through that. What we need to do is we need to get going though, because the first part here takes a little bit to run. So what I'm going to do is just walk you through a quick demo of how to get started here, and then once it gets running, it takes about 5 minutes sometimes for the full package to build and pull up. So I wanted to get that going. So really easy to get going for your web part. Once you do that first page, you got to do that first page. You got to get it all running. NPM has to be working. Everything's going there. But once you get to that point, we're going to go out and we're going to make a new directory. I'll call this my SPFs Spug demo, or the SharePoint users group for anybody who doesn't know. That's what. And then. All right, so we make a directory, we move into that directory. Then I'm going to have to make sure I don't fat finger anything. What we're going to do, so remember we installed Yeoman, we installed Gulp. That's what that was. I had to do that ahead of time. I apologize. I have created a brand new tenant here that we're going to work with 365, but some of these things just, they take longer to run than we have today and everything. So I had to get some of it going. That's why I put those scripts up there for you. You'll find out some of them take 30 minutes, an hour, things like that, just to get installed and running. Then what we're going to do is we are going to install a new SharePoint. If I can spell Microsoft, that's always good, isn't it? Oh my gosh. And then so one of the things we did on that previous slide here was we actually installed this Microsoft Share generator. Now we're actually going to utilize it. So when we do this, this is why I wanted to get this going though. There, oh, what did I do? Oh, you got to be kidding. Did type your what in the world? I've run this demo like 20 times and now it's going to, you know, did I type anything wrong? Did I miss? Yeah. Yo at Microsoft. Okay, who can see where I spelled wrong? Make sure I'm not fat fingering anything, and now I'm not seeing it. Where are we? What in the world? All right, so we may have to. Let me get this back up here when we. Oh, is that what it was? Something or. Thank you. All right. I swore so I was typing something in wrong. All right. So now what we've got here, it's going to ask you by default what you want your solution name to be, and we're just going to leave it the way it comes up here. This is important, though, obviously, for your naming. Now, this is all stuff that can be changed later on in configuration files and everything, but I'm just going to leave it the way it is. It's going to ask you, do you want to go with SharePoint Online only, which is going to be the latest and greatest stuff, or do you want to actually go with the last time 2016 was released, and you won't get all the full features and everything if you do that. So, of course, we're going to stick with SharePoint Online. And where do you want to place it? We're going to use the current folder. And you want to allow the tenant and admin the choice to deploy this everywhere. So we're going to have two options here. We have the option one, which is going to be that every time we deploy it, so we're going to end up putting this out in our application catalog here later on. But each time we want the app deployed, and somebody would have to go in, and they will have to create that app in each site where they want it. So if we have this where it's only going to go on one page in the entire organization, we wouldn't want to deploy this tenant-wide. But if we have a web part that we want available everywhere, we're going to do the weather web part or the stock ticker, and we want people to be able to put it anywhere they want in the organization, then we might allow the tenant to deploy, the admin to deploy it once, and it would just appear everywhere in the organization. This is a fairly new setting also. So the app catalog is a SharePoint admin. So it's the well, it says tenant admin. When you deploy this, you just have to be a SharePoint admin to do that. To get into, you just have to be able to go to the app catalog. So
that would make it appear in everybody's feature list, basically, but not necessarily activate it automatically.
It would act. So if we say yes to this, when the admin deploys it, they're going to have the option to say, do you just want to push this out everywhere? And then it would just become a web part that's available everywhere. Actually, very similar to the old way with our standard web part development, the server-side web part development, where you pretty much would have ended up in the, just globally deployed across the organization and everything. And you actually had to do stuff to make it not show up in other places. So in this case, I'm going to say no so that I can show you guys how we actually set this up. And then it's going to ask, what do you want to create, a web part or an extension? Today we're just doing web parts. And what's your web part name? And we'll call it demo. And you can add your own description for it and everything. I'm going to keep things moving. You have the option to include a framework here. React or Knockout are the two that are built in right now. Or no JavaScript framework. I'm going to go ahead and just hit that, and it's going to start building. And I wanted to go ahead and do that. The React or Knockout. So Knockout, of course, is actually one that I'm extremely familiar with and have done a ton of stuff, but it's becoming a little bit of an older technology for binding and everything. React, however, is what everybody at Microsoft is writing all of their stuff in. It's all the demos, everything you're going to see is all being written with React.js. So if you were going to focus on one of the technologies, if you're going to start learning something, if you're going to write a lot of these things, I would highly recommend going with React. So this is the part that takes about 5 minutes. So we'll skip over. So I kind of, this is in kind of a weird order. I started doing the web part because it's going to take a while. Then I wanted to come back over though and talk about what you need to do to get this to actually work in Office 365. The steps that you need to do is, first thing, you have to go out and create an app catalog. To create your app catalog, you go in through the SharePoint admin site, and you just go to the app catalog area, and it's just going to ask you if you want to create it. You give it a name. I don't think I've seen anybody not just call it app, but you can call it whatever the heck you want. It doesn't matter, but you call it app. And then for development purposes, I typically use the developer site. I create a team site with a developer site template and everything where I can create my list. I can create everything that I'm going to work with and everything there. The developer site template isn't necessarily fully configured to work with the SharePoint framework yet, but it's still kind of, it's the playground for developers and everything out there. And then the next step that I did, and again, these are the steps that I already took, especially this next step because it takes about 30 plus minutes to get set up. It's in enabling the CDN currently in the SharePoint environment. So hopefully, I don't know if everybody knows this, but they have in the last, it's been less than 6 months, I believe, they've actually set it up to where we can have public CDN information out there, so that obviously a problem with SharePoint is it's locked down. We don't even have public website capability anymore. So it's impossible generally to have publicly available JavaScript files. And if you're going from one site to the next, to the next, to the next, you either have to create a website that allows everyone access, and everyone's always a scary term, or we had to have some way, like through Azure or somewhere like that, to deploy these files. Remember I said this is all client-side, so eventually we're just going to be putting together a package that really consists of JavaScript files and some configuration files. But if we enable CDN now in SharePoint, it allows you to deploy this to one place in your tenant, and then from there, you can reference it because it's anonymously available from a SharePoint URL, from a SharePointOnline.com URL. That's the important part there. They're locking everybody else out. So you're not allowed to put something out there and then make it a publicly available CDN and you just run your packages out there. But for all of our projects here, all of our framework projects, we can make them available across the entire tenant. And actually, officially across anybody else's tenants, as long as they're on SharePointOnline.com. So I've got that here to show you how to enable it. There's two different types of CDNs. There's public and there's private. Private actually does some security validation. Public makes it anonymously available, like I said, across everything SharePointOnline.com. And so let's see. Yep, still going, so I'll have to vamp a little bit more. And so like I said, this takes a little bit here to run. But another very important thing, this process we just did here, the yo that we ran with the Microsoft SharePoint generator, if we were to run this a second time, we could choose another web. So it would automatically detect that if you ran it in the same directory a second time, you could add a second web part there. You could add an extension there. So this one solution that we're developing can house multiple web parts and extensions and everything. We can have one package that we're running. You can have as many as you want or as few as you want, depending on how you're doing it. If they, obviously grouping them and determining the proper organization is important. So with that, I guess I'll pause for a second while this is still running and just ask, are there any questions at this point? Am I going too fast? I'm trying to get to where we can open stuff up, but
the CDN that we talked about.
Yeah.
Could we use a SharePoint, like a root-sized library somewhere, like a site assets library?
Yes.
House stuff or no?
Yes and no. So you could. So if you're going to run that web part in one place and one place only. So I've got web parts that I run just for my business and everything that I've done, and that's exactly what I did. Before, the recommendation that you were supposed to go with, of course, what they wanted you to do was buy Azure storage. And they charge you for the Azure storage for it and everything. And that's great. It's it's wonderful, but and then you were getting charged also for accessing that storage. So if you want to develop a web part that was going to be used for, if you're going to make it, let's say you were going to commercialize it, and make it available to everybody, and then all of a sudden people are pulling your web part down all the time, your cost would get you the cost of the Azure storage would go up tremendously. So that's exactly what I did for mine. Is I said, you know what, I just want to find out if I can do this, and so I just put it in the site assets library, and then we're able to make reference to that in the config file out there and everything. So you can definitely do that, but by default, the CDN is we're still going to deploy it, and just by putting it in the app catalog now, it's going to get a public CDN by enabling that. So you don't even have to go to you don't even have to go through that pain. We used to have to deploy the package, and then you had to deploy the files to where they belonged and everything. They keep churning this. This just preparing for this. I actually even had some things written in the slides, and as I was preparing to come talk to you guys today, I said, oh, they fixed that. That's great, because I had notes in there. I said, oh, you're going to want to do this, or don't do this because it doesn't work well. They fixed it for us. So they are churning this like you cannot believe right now. And just on the call the SharePoint call that I attended this morning, they're constantly making improvements, and they are this is where they're focusing so much of their effort. And they made it a very big point to say the old add-in model for SharePoint and everything, the people even who, the SharePoint developers, the SharePoint team up in Redmond, they didn't even do their own stuff using the add-in model. They're doing everything now. They have bought into this full premise. They love the SharePoint framework, and they're spending tons of time with it. Yes?
How can you tell if the app catalog is set up?
Question. The easiest way is try to go to it. So of course you have to have the ability to get there. You need to go to your admin site. You go to your SharePoint site. And then you go to apps.
And you have to be an admin?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So all this stuff, yeah, because this code, the code is always going to run as the user. That's another thing we don't get. That's another thing. I didn't talk about any of the downsides here that we don't get anymore. We had server-side code before. Remember, you could run with elevated privileges and you could do all kinds of cool stuff. You don't get to do that anymore. This is going to run as a user. Now you can, of course, you can write your own APIs that you call, and you can do things. You could write, your own REST API, your own whatever API you wanted that would elevate the privileges through using the CSOM maybe, or doing something else like that. But so the answer is, to know if it's set up, it does have to be an admin. It's got to be a SharePoint admin, and all you really have to do is come here and click App Catalog. And if it takes you to the App Catalog's set up. If you click App Catalog and it says you don't have one, do you want to set one up? Then the SharePoint admin needs to create it. So this is for the tenant here. Yes. Now that's another thing here. So we saw our one property that was really neat that says, hey, do you want to allow the tenant admin to deploy this across the entire tenant for us automatically? Woohoo, that sounds great. You know what they don't have yet? The ability to not do that. And once we deploy it, to say, I only want an app catalog for the site collection. It's coming. They said, at least that's what they told us. That is coming. So again, churn. So while this has been out for a little bit, they are still making changes like you cannot believe.
Because I don't think really going to allow them to do an admin of the entire office.
Yeah.
That's what I need to be in their catalog.
At least to be a SharePoint admin to do it. And so, best practice, of course, is if you're the developer that you're not the person deploying it. You've got somebody who's responsible for it and everything. So you're actually submitting the package and it's going through a proper QA process and everything there. But in an organization the size of WashU, that's probably reasonable. I know some of the other people here might be the IT department that's here, and everything. So there's kind of, you kind of got both sides of the world there. I'm sorry? No, exactly. So, but then later on to deploy to it, to actually put something in the app catalog, you have to have the permission to do it. And with that, I think you can actually do permissions. So once it's set up, now that I'm trying to think through. It's just a site collection, so I think permissions can be set up and then people can deploy it, but I'm trying to remember, since it does kind of get rolled out across the tenant, don't know the answer to that actually though. Once it's set up, if you can just be given the contribute rights to the site collection and be able to add it, which we'll do here in a little bit too, but I'd have to look at that to see what permissions are required for the app catalog. All right. So finally, after this whole thing ran, now, remember what I said my favorite code editor was that we're going to do? We're going to use Visual Studio Code for this and everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and open code. Now we can actually start looking at stuff and seeing what's going on here. So what we have here, all Visual Studio does is open up whatever folder, opens up a folder and just breaks it out here. And most of the places we're going to look are going to be in the source subdirectory of what was created. And you can immediately see the Spug demo web part that I created. Remember I said if you ran this multiple times and created multiple web parts or extensions, it would just create multiple subdirectories here for these different pieces. And of course the biggest thing here is our Spug demo web part.ts TypeScript. Hopefully people have some background at least with the TypeScript here and everything. But that's going to be what we kind of walk through here. But we just have, it just sets up again, a hello world here. So if I was to run this right now, did it just die on me when I did that? It should have done that. And it's going to open up a previous one. Why are you making me look silly? All right, so we're back here. If I was to go out here and I was to start running this, gulp serve out there. Remember we installed gulp earlier. This is our generator, and this actually runs a web server for us so that we can test this out a little bit. But this is just a hello world web part. This is as hello world as it gets, really. It's pretty basic and boring. While that's spinning up, I'll come back over here and our source files. And what the anatomy of our web part really is in this file here, this is everything. This is the render method, which is truly the HTML that gets kicked out at the beginning of this. If you were to choose the React or the knockout here, you would still come in, you'd see the render, but then you would see it actually come through and set up, like in your knockout web part, it actually sets up a template, so it actually goes to an HTML file. You can do all that yourself. You can work with Angular here. You can work with any of the frameworks you prefer, and there's plenty of, especially Angular, there's tons of templates out there for it. That's actually another comment they made this morning I was a little surprised about because, as I said, React.js is what the team uses in Redmond. But they just said with the new release of Angular, I don't know if they're excited about it or what's happening with it, but they talked about seeing some new things that we're going to be able to do with Angular coming up too. But that's just, we saw that we only had React or Knockout is available. I've been disappointed that they don't have Angular as one of our automatic templates that comes up there. There's plenty of those out on Codeplex, or not Code, I'm sorry, Codeplex is old, out on GitHub and everything out there. So if I was to add this web part to a workbench here, and we'll talk about debugging here in a minute, but if I was to bring it up, this is your hello world. This is what you get right out of the box. That's what's getting rendered right here. We've got pretty much a render method. So even if you don't know TypeScript, hopefully you can kind of walk through and see a little bit of this. We've got our render method, and it is spitting out HTML. Now, the really cool thing about this is one of my favorite things is you can see the styles area getting mixed in. So by default, all of our class or not use a flat ID of your items, but instead to have your classes generated, they end up getting generated with a key on the back end. We've got styles spug demo, styles container, styles row, styles column, and we can come back to this in a minute, but what we have here is we have this SCSS file, and you'll see that all of these are being generated here along the way. They're just placed in here this way, so you can see there's already a .spug demo up there, and you say, well, why in the heck would I then, why would I go through the spug demo in the page that way? And the answer to that is if we inspect the element here, that it actually, here you go, here's row with 030, so it puts a code on the end of it. And every time you put that web part on the page, it's going to end up with a different code on the end of there. The idea behind this is so we all use row. Who doesn't use row to identify a row? But the problem is Bootstrap uses row. Everybody uses row. What they're doing is trying to protect us so that we don't have class overlap. We don't start colliding with the built-in CSS styles that are out there and everything else. We just have our own. So we're kind of sandboxing this without sandboxing it, if that makes sense at all. So within our render method, we're kicking out all the HTML we want. We've got the information we're importing at the top. And then we've got a property pane configuration down a little bit lower. So by default, they give us a free property, which is the description field here, which of course is Spug Demo. And then if I just put test on there, I don't remember. Oh, there it is. It's showing on the page right here. That's one of my favorite things, actually. If you don't override it, these properties change immediately as you're changing them. Like literally as you're typing, they're reflected in your web part as you go. So that's really the anatomy, the beginning of how we do this. It gets a lot more advanced. I'd say we could do a lot more things, but we've got our CSS. But what we can do also then immediately is we start bringing in other features, other things. And the one just to show you today that I want to bring in some jQuery. Like I said, I like jQuery. I like jQuery UI, and we're going to use that a little bit and start doing a couple things with how we can just do a couple tweaks to our page here. We're not going to get in any detail here. If we get good feedback, if people want to see something else, we can talk about a more advanced session on this and go deeper into the pieces later on. But we're going to go out to, we've got a config file out here. This is actually a very, very important file under the config folder. There's a config.json file. And this actually helps us set up a lot of our imports is what it is. What can we bring into our solution? We get a whole bunch of freebie stuff, which is a lot of it that starts with Microsoft, whatever. But we can also import tons of stuff by using that NPM that we used before, the Node package manager. Bring some more information in, and just other third-party tools that are out there. And in our case, we're going to bring in jQuery. And to do that, I need to install jQuery into our, all fancy and got us running with SculptServe already, but I'm going to go ahead and do npm install, and then we'll bring in jQuery 2. And these are going to go out, and they're going to bring down or pull from what we have saved locally, depending on whether we've done a global save on it and everything. That's getting into a little bit of the NPM stuff. We do have the ability to pull directly from GitHub or from some other location, or we have the ability to pull it down and store it on our local machine to make it a little bit faster, which I did, but it's still going to take its sweet time here, of course. And there we go. And we'll do jQuery UI. I'm not going to use jQuery UI, but I just wanted to show you guys that we could pull down multiple packages here. And while that's down, so they're installed locally, so they're available to us now. We're also going to need to install their TypeScript libraries also, so that TypeScript actually understands what they are, so that we can actually have some autocomplete stuff going on in code. You could type it out yourself, and it would, well, I guess, no, if you didn't have the extensions, if you didn't have the types installed, it's the compiler would yell at you, all your fun stuff there. Let's see, so I want to get to that, and do a couple other things. What is it, types? Yeah. The second part I'm doing is installing the type libraries for TypeScript here, so that as we type later on, the compiler will know about the pieces here and everything. How many people know? Has anybody used TypeScript in here? Have you written some TypeScript? I was afraid of that as I'm going through. Okay, so we probably I guess that's kind of a different thing. So TypeScript is written by Microsoft, of course. And it is an extension built on top of JavaScript. I think it could work in other languages. I'm pretty positive it works in other languages too, but JavaScript's the biggest one that it's written for. And what TypeScript does is it allows type checking. It allows for code. So you think about if you're going to write C# or VB or whatever it is you're going to write in out there. You get your good Visual Studio. It shows you, it does checking to say this is a string or this is an integer. Whereas by default JavaScript lets you everything's a var, and you get to just go with it, and you can make it a string 1 second, and then the next second you assign a number to it, and it just overwrites it and goes through. So what TypeScript does is it allows for a more structured framework that and it also allows for packages to be installed in the back end so that we get a lot of, I'll just say free libraries, if you will, that it can do some of the heavy lifting for us, and it'll just compile it. But at the end of the day, everything we're going to do here in TypeScript is going to get compiled to JavaScript. So it's going to run in all of our browsers. It's not going to just run on Edge, which nothing runs on Edge, but it's not going to run in IE, and that's it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So we installed the types for jQuery and jQuery UI so far, and that's going to be important in a minute because we're going to import those items. And one of the other quick things that I wanted to show you, I could just go ahead and start referencing those, but I personally always, for jQuery, for Angular, for Knockout even, I use CDNs that are out there with the hopes, of course, that somebody already has those installed on their machine, whether they're logging in on their phone or whatever it is, that they hopefully don't have to go and pull the library down. So I'm just going to show you real quick in this config section that I can modify this, and I can add actually, we'll do this faster so that I'm just going to put these two things in the external area. I'll see what happens if you let me type. I still can't tell you what I was doing wrong earlier. What I figured when I was getting that yo going and everything. So one of the things I can do here is specify in the externals area here the CDNs for these files, so that once we get going, once this is published and we're no longer in debug mode, it'll actually go out and pull these down. And of course, I always point to the minified versions of those items out there and everything. This is not required. Again, I'm going to show you guys a lot of personal preferences as I go, and stop me along the way. But then I'm going to come back over here into the TypeScript. So sorry, it's like, wow, yeah, TypeScript is definitely something you want to learn to be able to do this. But it's really, it's not awful. It's not. There's a little bit of a learning curve with it. I was doing it back when I used Notepad++. Everything was in Notepad++, and I just was doing all the compiles and everything else from the command line. So Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, a lot of tools now are going to help you with this. So it's actually a better time to start learning TypeScript now than it was when it first came out and everything. But what I'm going to do is, if we want to reference one of these packages that we just installed, of course jQuery, we actually have to import it in. We actually have to tell our TypeScript file about it. Import all as, I could say jQuery, but I'm going to stick with the normal nomenclature that people use. I'm going to do as $. From jQuery, and then I can also just do import jQuery UI. That's not required though. I'm not going to do a demo on UI. That would take too much time to get set up here. But now that I've done that, what I can go back and do now, I can immediately start using jQuery selects. I can just use are people familiar with jQuery? Is that okay? So that's so I'm going to leave this information the way it is, but I'm going to come down here and let's see, what do I want to do? Okay, to do this, I've got to do a couple more. One of my other favorite things that you can do here is we've got a couple environments that we're going to be working in. We've got, of course, our local environment that we're going to be working in, or we could be working in classic SharePoint or inside the new modern interface. And we have a way to actually query that information and figure out where we are and do different things. The biggest one to do differently is if I'm working locally, I don't have access to SharePoint. I can't go get lists and libraries, and I can't call my REST APIs and all that fun stuff. So I could fake that data. I could actually have temporary data that I work with that maybe I've gone out, pulled the REST API down, and put it in a temporary file maybe that I'm going to work with and everything. So I'm going to go back out, and one of the things I need to do up here is tell it on, is that my core library? Yes, my core library. I'm going to tell it that I want to also use environment. And if you notice as I start typing, for anybody who's not familiar with Visual Studio Code, it's great once we get all this stuff set up and we install this stuff, it immediately knows about a lot of this information that we're working with here. So I'm going to pull an environment and environment type. And you'll see how we're going to use those here in a second. What I'm going to basically do is I'm going to go down here, we'll do a little bit of code. I'll try scrolling down some so I kind of bring this up to the middle of the page. But just we're in our render method still here, and I'm just going to do some basic stuff here. So I'll do var, and we'll do color string equals string, and then I'll start and say if environment.type equals environment type dot local. So it immediately gives me this by having an environment type. I'm able to go out and say if it's local, then I'm going to set button color equals red. And to speed things up, we'll do this and do else if. And look at what it does immediately when I did that copy and paste. It's even evaluated my if statement here for me and said, wait, if it's local here, it's not going to be an else if local here and here. So this is some of the free stuff you get by using code and with the TypeScript language. So it immediately knew that I was doing something wrong. So, but as soon as I change it to saying SharePoint, orange, I do classic SharePoint, I can do green. So now I've accommodated all my environments. Like I said, if you need to differentiate between the classic SharePoint environment and the modern pages, you can do that. I find more often than not, I'm just really saying, am I in my local test environment, or have I migrated, am I up into SharePoint? We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. And then we're going to go back and actually do what we set out to do here. Oh, look at that. As soon as I hit $, it immediately knows I'm in jQuery now. So I'm going to do $dot, and I'm going to stick with, remember my styles, that CSS page, but remember it gets that weird code appended to it and everything, so it's important if we're referencing this that we reference it the right way. And we'll do button. And so we're going to go and select our button on the page, and we're going to do CSS, and we'll do button color. So now basically I'm going to and if I was to come back over here, it's not running anymore. Let me get back to where we're running again. Run my gulp serve again. And I keep going in this gulp serve here, but we're going to come back to this for debugging. What this opens up is something called the workbench, and by default, it's going to open up what's called the local workbench. It's going to be really cool here, is we're going to take a look at, is that you can also open up the workbench inside Office 365 in your SharePoint environment. So you can go get your own list. Like I said, I create a dev site when I'm doing it, so I can create the list that I need or whatever it is I need. But you can call just the standard API stuff. You can get web information, site collection information, whatever it is you need to do through the REST API. So I don't know if you remember, I think this was a blue button before. Now it's a red button, but remember that. Now we're going to go and deploy to different places as we go along the way, and it will actually, that the color will change there and everything for us. Kind of going through this a little bit fast, I know, but like I said, I got more. We're not even going to get to all the information I was hoping to get to today. This is something I love. I talked to Becky about 2-3 weeks ago, and I said I'll stop adding stuff, and I couldn't stop. I just kept putting more in here. So we have more in the slides, and then if you let people know what you're interested in, we can talk about future presentations and stuff too, or to go back over anything that we talk about in here in a little bit more detail. But I think that's mostly okay. So the next thing I had in the slides was debugging, which we kind of already started talking about. We do have a couple different things. We have the local workbench that I was just talking about. It's only available locally, no SharePoint access whatsoever. And we have the hosted workbench, which is going to put us right up into SharePoint. And so when you're dealing with code here, Visual Studio Code is what I'm talking about when I just say code like that, it already understands these environments. So there's already a configuration for local workbench. There's also already a configuration for the hosted workbench. And but for that, when you first create your site, it doesn't have any clue where your hosted workbench is. It doesn't know where you're going to go. So for this, by default, it's any of your sites with _layouts workbench.aspx. So we just talked about that. It says enter your SharePoint site here is where it's going to go. So I'm going to jump back over here and got these open. Here's my dev site. So I'm going to copy my dev site over here, and I'm going to put this in here. If you didn't do this, it would just open up a blank page, and you could still work with it. It's no problem. Go ahead and do that. We're going to come and look at both of these. But what's really cool about this is right out of the box with any of these environments, whether it's local or in our hosted workbench, you can come right over here. You can set a breakpoint. And you can start your local workbench. Add my web part to the page. And it's going to make a complete, did it pause? Oh, I'm sorry. When you first load it, it doesn't do anything. It just runs. If you refresh it, though, after you add it to the page, that's where we get the breakpoint. So we come right in, and we're able to start stepping. Normal Visual Studio steps. I'm just using F10 to go through. So is the environment local? Hey, yes, it is. So we're going to make it red. So let's see, did it show anything? You notice it's blue right now. And then we just step through. We can get all our breakpoints. We can do everything here. We can hover. We can inspect objects. You can get your debug console where you can type stuff in. You can just work with it almost just like you're in regular Visual Studio, even debugging server-side code here and everything now. That's great. Hey, that's local workbench. But now we can also do this exact same thing. Let me find my on the hosted workbench. I went and copied the username that I used because I use it extremely long. Sure, I'll stay signed in. It opens an in private window anyway, so every time I close it, it's going to make me sign back in again for the workbench. But if you're using your own account, though, I think it'll hold it after a while. But for mine, it kicks up this way and does that. So now look at how many more web parts we see here and everything. The ones that are built in. I didn't even know there was a Kindle web part out there. But what did I call this? I called it Spug Demo. There we go. So now we're in our SharePoint environment. And look what happened when I refreshed the page again this time. I'm back over here again, and I'm right back at my breakpoint. So I can actually start making SharePoint REST API calls here. I pointed this to the dev environment, to that dev site that I wanted to go to. So if I had any list or libraries or anything else here that I was working with that I was going to require in my environment or anything, I could have those here and work with them locally before I deploy this out and everything. So you can do full debugging and testing actually in very close to the real environment. I'll never say it's the real environment. We're still in a workbench here that we're able to work through and everything. Some of the other really cool things about the workbench, and this is for local and hosted, look at what we get. We get a couple extra things here. You get mobile, where it's going to put up your phone here. You can get a couple different phones, I believe. Let me see. That's you're making me lie. I know there's I don't remember if I had to install something here or whatever it was, but or is it just frozen? I think I have frozen up. I'm going to kill out of that. It locked up on me there, I believe. Oh, I bet I know why it locked up. Can anybody guess? The breakpoint. Not thinking. So we'll go ahead and remove that so I don't look silly anymore. Like, wait, it never locks up on me. Chrome's great. I do use Chrome. I'm not a I used to be an IE guy and everything, but I stick with Chrome now pretty much as I can with the development, debugging and everything that's out there for the client side stuff too. So I do need so are there any questions right now? We're getting, oh my gosh, Becky told me only take an hour, and we're at 4:30 now, but I got to get you where we deploy this thing. We got to deploy a web part. But are there any questions right now? We'll have questions at the end, but I don't want to skip over anywhere where somebody might have something they want to ask. Okay, then to deploy the solution, what you end up having to do is package up your solution, and then you end up grabbing that package and putting it in your app catalog. So it's actually really not too hard to do, but it's command line stuff. So if you're afraid of the command line, you're going to have to wait a little bit before everything catches up before you get a nice graphical user interface. But we're still in a lot of command line stuff right now. Let's make this so I can see it so I don't fat finger anything and drag this up a little bit for you guys, but we're just going to do a gulp. Bundle. We're going to create a bundle for it, and we're going to ship it, saying it's fully ready. Go ahead and minimize everything. Go ahead and make it ready for production here. And I do want to point this out. I did that gulp serve right away when I brought this up. Originally, when you first bring up your solution, I want to warn you, you'll see some red squiggly lines in code especially. It's because those styles, until the first time you compile your solution, it doesn't compile that SCSS file right away. And therefore, it's going to act like there's errors in there. That's all you got to do is build it once, and all those errors go away. And then it doesn't do that anymore. And then and I misspelled solution. It'll yell at me in a second. Yep. Sometimes it takes a lot longer to build if you've got a lot more TypeScript, if you've got a lot more stuff it's got to figure out. But in this case, it was nice and fast for us. And can anybody see where File Explorer is? I already had it opened up. So where this ends up putting it is easy for me. SharePoint solution. And it ends up creating this SPFx file. This is a SharePoint package file. And this is what we actually move over to our app catalog. So if we were to back over here, brought up my app catalog here. We got our apps for SharePoint. So remember I told you this was a brand new tenant, guys. Besides those little scripts I showed you at the beginning, I just set this up with the 30-day free trial stuff. I wasn't going to keep doing all the demo stuff in my tenant. So maximize this so that it's there. And then hopefully, well, you're going to go, oh, come on. There we go. Drag and drop. And it asks you, do you want to deploy your solution? Of course, I'm going to deploy it, which of course your admin should have know what they're deploying, where they got it from. Is it from a trusted source, that sort of thing? There's a ton of stuff out there on CodePlex, but I keep saying, my gosh, on GitHub. And but I highly recommend you fully review the code. Actually, if you're going to do that, you go and get it yourself and you work with it unless you really trust the person, because we all like to pretend there's nice people out there, but we also know there's not nice people out there. So, and they will run inside your browser with a lot of trust where they could possibly grab company information or something like that. So if you guys are building this for your own company, it's hopefully not as big of a deal, but watch out for your third-party stuff. So we've deployed this. Now what we have to do is we'll go back and I got my dev site where I was working with this. I'm going to go ahead over and I'm going to add an app. So, remember that setting that I said no to earlier on, where I said when I deploy it, it doesn't automatically become available everywhere. That's what I'm accounting for right now. Just on the site that I want it to work on right now, I'm going to go in because I have permission as a contributor. I have the ability to go out and I see apps I can add. And here you go, that long demo client-side solution name that I didn't rename when we were creating it that you would definitely want to rename when you're doing it for real. I'm just going to add the app. And it's adding here. And this usually goes pretty fast. And while it's adding, the two major things that we aren't going to get to today that I apologize because we're not going to have enough time is we talked about the property panel, the property pane. You can go out, and they're actually doing tons of advanced stuff with you being able to create your own advanced properties out there. But you can create, you have sliders out there, you have checkboxes, drop-down list, all kinds of things that you can have as properties of your web parts that you can use them inside the part, of course. And whatever's necessary. If you're familiar with the traditional web part development style, the server side, it's very, very similar to that. We get to do all of that stuff. There is one slide I will want to go over, just so you know, because there's a couple properties. There we go. So then I'll go, and I'm going to add a page. And there's my new page. Yeah. And I called it Spug something. Hey, and there it is. I'm going to put it on the page. And of course there's a problem. What else could there be? Let's see. Really? My web part doesn't even do anything. That would be boring. You get an error right here. I joke with my wife about this before. She's been watching me do the same thing over and over again for weeks. And I was like, now watch. We're going to get some errors when it goes, what in the world is it? I just want to see if it's taking its time or. Sometimes it takes a little bit for it to get going as you're deploying it. So I'm doing this kind of quickly, but it usually doesn't lead it. Come on. Do something wrong. Failed to load from my CDN. Something? Apologize, folks. Let's see. You didn't do the most advanced thing here. There's no reason that it should be blowing it up on us. Is there anything I forgot when I was building? Package, upload, add app. Oh, package. So I bundled it, I packaged it, we copied it over. There is absolutely no reason. Unless it just hiccuped along the way. Oh, already running? Local workbench is already running. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with the web part. Stop there. Try bundling and shipping it again, or bundling and packaging it again. Task package. Wait. Oh. Solution, of course. All done. All there. Okay. Boy. All right, I apologize. I don't know what's happening there. This is like I said, it's pretty much a hello world demo that we got going. I didn't test it in this new tenant, so I may have forgotten something when I set up the tenant. That's a possibility, but because I wanted to have it as clean. I had a different test tenant that I was working with, and then I purposely started a brand new one so we'd have a nice clean one with all the instructions. And if I figure out what I forgot, I'll make sure that I publish it with the notes also, so I'll add it to the slide deck to say if I skip something and everything. But I want to jump back over so we don't run out of time. The web part properties, though, what I was talking to you guys about the different properties and what you can have, but the thing that I want to let you know about is one extra configuration, some things that are for configuration. If by default you don't set anything up for your web part properties, they're not searchable. The text inside the property, they don't automatically fix the links or unsafe HTML. And I think searchable and unsafe HTML are kind of explanatory, I hope. Link fix is really cool because if you point to a page, like you have a link to a page in there, if you rename that page, it's supposed to be anywhere in your tenant. It'll automatically fix it in all of the web parts wherever you have them. So if you have this web part to play in 20, 30 different places, and it's referencing a page somewhere and you rename that page, it'll fix that link for you automatically. So that's a really cool one in my opinion. The unsafe HTML is just a must if you're letting the user put anything in there. And then searchable is cool if you want it to actually come up in the search. You can actually provide information that the user, that can be entered as a property, and it can actually be searchable in the search engine. So I've got this little breakdown here, and I've actually even got the little code snippet on how to do this and everything, which I've got your defaults versus what happens if you specify the different properties here. And then the other thing that we're definitely not going to run back through, though, is the REST API demo here, but I think that would probably be, I think people's brains are probably turning to mush right now anyway, so but what the last thing, and I actually have a little bit of code in here for you and everything, but what that is the finally putting it all together and actually going out and making a call to SharePoint in here, kind of putting together some of the tools that we had and pulling back. All I had of pulling back was the web information, the current web that you're on and everything like that. So I want to skip down to the end here for questions, give a little bit of time at the end. Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, so specifically this path was taken when they started rolling out modern pages. When they started rolling out the SharePoint modern pages. So if you're talking about an MVC app, you're talking about a completely separate website or something like that. This is more for SharePoint Online, and this is for getting these parts into your intranet, or yes. Yes. And
like a video library or something that get all kinds.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, and so this is a tool in your toolbox. Definitely. This is not, and I never want to make it sound like there's anything. Because to take one step back, even for SharePoint development here, you can still. So originally, when they rolled out modern web pages, you couldn't. There was no web part. There was no content editor web part. There was no script editor web part. Those exist now. People have gone out and created SPFx versions of those. So a lot of this stuff you could do yourself via JavaScript or however you wanted to do it. But they are but then they're not reusable at that point. So if you're just going to do one thing in one place, but if you wanted a full page application, but if it referenced SharePoint information, you'd still have to get your SharePoint. So if you needed to, so you talked about, maybe making a video library. But if all those links to the videos are located in a SharePoint list or something like that, then you got to get your it's basically the digest. You got to get the digest for it so that you actually are authenticated as you come across. Then you've got CORS problems. So if you're talking about SharePoint Online, if you're going between, if you're trying to reference things back and forth and do different things. So if you're right, if you got, let's say so you've got a database out there that is that you got all your videos in and it points out to a blob storage somewhere else where your videos are located. You could do that in MVC. Now, another reason maybe why you wouldn't want to is because you spent a lot of time on the branding of your SharePoint Online site or whatever it is you're using, and you don't want to have to put the wrapper around that, the frame, everything else, and then come back. And then when they change, then when marketing decides they're going to change it every 6 weeks or whatever it is, I don't know. It's when they do that you need to come back and fix it each time so it stays matched up. So you're exactly right, and that's exactly what I would do, because there's always the add-in model. that actually can kick you out to third parties, to other websites, and can actually keep you, it'll keep the digest information so that you can securely come back into SharePoint and all that fun stuff. So all of these things are very possible. This is just one tool. Because you still got your old way of doing tons of development. I mean, officially sandbox development even works, I think, on the classic pages still and everything like that. So so there's tons of stuff you can do, but this is where they're going and where they're right now. Pages, way to get content on a modern. I mean, I didn't even think there was I don't remember if there was a document library web part when they first rolled out modern pages and everything. But they are churning these things and churning them, and then third-party developers that hopefully you can find and trust are putting these out too and doing some really cool things with them. But yeah, my favorite part is the fact that they work in classic and modern pages. And by default, you're going to develop. Now, you have to do the development for this, but to get the responsive design and everything, so that especially for SharePoint Online and that, you can pull out your phone, you can do whatever you're going to do, and just allow people to move from one to the next. Whereas I was just telling Glenn before the meeting that one of the things they announced today that's coming out is that these web parts you're going to be able to use inside Teams also. They're going to be able to get their own tab inside of Teams, so that then you can reference the SharePoint information right inside your Teams area and be able to pull it and maybe do a cool graph, to do whatever you want to do with it. Now, with that said, also, one of the things I will say, which is more powerful, and that's kind of one of the reasons I didn't go over it today because it would take a lot more to explain and go through, is the extensions. The extension stuff is extremely powerful, and what you can do with it and how it allows you to customize your entire tenant if you want, or however it is with one piece of code, is just amazing. I don't know if that fully answers it because I don't have, I'm by no means ever trying to say you have to do this, this is the only way to do it. It's another tool in your belt. Other questions? On-prem, well, they just rolled out, okay, so they just rolled out the 2016 stuff in Feature Pack 2, I believe it was, which only came out a couple weeks ago. So that was the first that you got any of this. They said this morning on the call, SharePoint 2019 will have modern pages. The SPFx will work for modern pages. And well, they're going to have modern pages in there, so that's the big thing and everything. And so the SPFx will be there and everything. But again, what they're going to do is they'll draw a line in the sand somewhere and say, so maybe it's today, and they'll say, okay, we're starting our release candidates, and everything that's in SharePoint Online today is what you're going to get in 2019, let's say. I don't know that they're even going to ever treat 2016. I hope they do. That 2016 will become a first-class citizen, at least at some point, compared to SharePoint Online with this stuff. Yes, if they continue the process, it's. Yeah. Hmm? I don't believe you can deploy your packages with PowerShell. I think I saw that as one of the top actually that was on our community site. When you went to the meetup area, somebody was asking that we actually support their request. Was that yours?
It was a coworker.
Okay, yeah, I was like, I just heard about this. Where was that? And I tried to look also. I tried to do a search to see if it was there also, and I did not see anywhere that you can. No, I have not seen anything that allows that. Because even that new setting of deploying tenant-wide that shocked me. I just found that. I was like, wow, where'd that come from? But then I watched a video from the guys in Redmond on it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is brand new. I was like, that wasn't there last time I built one of these things. and so they're going that way. But I don't know if you were here. The other thing they don't have yet, though, is the reverse, which is to say the site collection app catalog. But that's supposed to be coming. so that you don't have to deploy it to your app catalog that's tenant-wide. You can do it to a smaller, yeah. Yeah, because that's a lot of these things that I do. That's what a lot of people want. They want a modern homepage, let's say, and so they only want the web part to be in one place in the entire site anyway. And so deploying this and having some curious person dropping it on pages all over the place for the contributors or whatever is kind of, not contributors, but the power users that can do that is a little bit different. Hey, Becky. Other questions? Yeah, and so I will make these slides available. They do have it in there, but yeah, unfortunately, yeah, you guys have you're going to have to go start. I would highly recommend starting to look at TypeScript. But Visual Studio Code is a TypeScript monster. I think it makes it so easy. And with the amount of snippets that are out there right now, of course, again on GitHub, everything the team's doing, all this stuff, including all this code, everything those gulp things that I was doing and with Yeoman generator and all that stuff, this is all open source. You can go and look at all of this, but of course, that's really advanced. Go and look at the web parts that they've already developed. Go and look at the extensions that they've already developed and glean some of that information, or grab them and turn them into what you need them to be. They've got tons of just amazing examples. Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then I think it's time for happy hour. So, and it's for anybody who hasn't been here before. I think it's right back in the kitchenette here. Everything there's Glenn, and I don't know, Becky. You want to
say thank you for speaking. Sorry, just showing up here now. I did not know what a late questions are. Thank you guys all for coming. Is anybody here? Is this your first meeting? Anybody? First timers? Right. Woo! Thank you guys for coming. It's great. Just out of curiosity, how did you guys find out? Is it Polly? Oh, perfect. All right. And what kind of
Meetup.
Awesome. You know, we used to sort of like kind of spread word of mouth. Now we just we sort of alternate. Most of you guys know we alternate morning and evening sessions for people to accommodate their schedules. And so this is an evening session. Our next one will be in the morning, and that's usually about 8:30. I have a speaker lined up, but we're not ready to announce the part yet. Make sure that you verify some call, but that would be patient session Tuesday, which will have to go later. My word, I call it Microsoft Today, the new building should be open in July, and so I want to thank Glenn again. He's been phenomenal to allow us to enjoy his free beverages and space and everything like that here at Salesforce. But at some time we may things like the facilities are at the Microsoft.
So next month's meeting will still be here, correct?
What?
Next month's meeting.
Yes, next month's meeting. She said that they moved them on like July 2nd. She said we're not allowed to book anything yet. She'll call back later. Because I think that they shipped a couple times. So the next meeting will be here. And we're trying to get social media up and running for the group. We're still working on that. But since this is recorded, hopefully we can get that put up on